right. Well, now it is 2 o'clock. And so I want to welcome everyone to the 2025 AIC halftime show. There won't be any musical acts or anything like that, like the Super Bowl halftime show, but uh, wanted to have an opportunity to share with you the current status of a lot of the priority bills that we've been working on thus far this legislative session. If you were at our uh, legislative conference, you heard kind of what was the starting place for a lot of these bills, but of course, several of them have been amended as we go through the process. And so, uh, because the legislature has now switched legislation, bills that have passed the House have moved over to the Senate and vice versa. Now is a good time to take stock of where we're at. Also, the legislature is, for the first time I can remember anyway, taking a much needed 1 week hiatus from action so that they can also gather their breath and take stock as well. So they will begin back next Monday, March 3rd, with committee hearings and legislative session to continue discussing all of these and many more bills. So with that, I will jump right into the presentation. I'll start sharing the screen for slide difficulty. There we go. Hopefully you all see the slideshow now. Of course, the biggest bill of discussion so far this year has been Senate Bill 1, which began as Governor Braun's property tax plan. It was amended pretty substantially during the Senate committee discussion of that bill to dramatically reduce the fiscal impact to local government. Instead of trying to wind back the clock to tax bills as of 2021 and then cap their growth going forward using tax credits, the bill essentially was gutted and replaced with the Senate version of their tax plan, which functions a little bit like this. So it caps the max levy growth quotient at 0% next year, percent the following year, 2% the third year, and then after 2029 would institute a new max levy growth quotient calculation for each county. So today we use a statewide MLGQ rate that each unit uses to budget from. The new max levy growth quotient, instead of being one calculation based on the 6-year rolling average of non-farm personal income, it would take into account more different factors such as inflation, labor productivity, things like that. But probably most substantial, it would, like I said, create a different calculation for every county. So counties that are fast growing are going to have higher max levy growth quotients than counties that are not growing or have stagnant growth. In addition to that, there would be the Senate Bill 6. So they took pieces from several different other property tax bills, moved them all into Senate Bill 1. So like Senate Bill 6 was the county option tax deferral program that moves into Senate Bill 1. Also, the lowered ag land base rate calculation from, I think it was Senate Bill 8, maybe, moved into Senate Bill 1. This bill also expands the over 65 and veteran tax deductions and creates a first-time homebuyer tax credit. So I mentioned that the fiscal impact was much smaller from this legislation as compared to the original version of Senate Bill 1. And here you can see for the different unit types what the impact would be over the next 3 years. And while there would certainly be impacts from the farmland rate calculation, the increased deductions, and the first time homebuyer tax credit, the max levy growth quotient would essentially result in no or slower growth of property tax budgets over the next few years, and that's where the bulk of the uh, tax savings for taxpayers comes into play. So, whereas for example, in calendar year 2026, the originally filed version of Senate Bill 1 had a $1.1 billion revenue impact to local government. And as you can see, it is down to 239 million instead. So dramatically reduced, about a quarter of the previous amount in calendar 26. And it does certainly grow from there. And of course, that is lost growth opportunity from the capped max levy growth quotients. Now, this bill passed over to the House with significant support. I think it was like 40-9, if I remember correctly. And so all eyes are on the House to next get to take a swing at the property tax reform issue. And while House Bill 1402 itself did not pass out of the House, I want to share it with you because it probably represents a template for what the House may do with Senate Bill 1 once they start having committee hearings on it. So if you remember back to the way it was originally filed, this bill has a significant hit to business personal property tax. It eliminates BPP for new equipment. It eliminates the floor and increases the small filer exemption. It also phases in elimination of the kind of split homestead and supplemental deductions to become a flat 2/3 deduction of AV on all homestead property, phases in a 1/3 deduction for all 2% cap properties. So those things obviously would result in lower bills and lower revenue, dramatically lower. But the bill also, as we have discussed a lot over the past probably 2 years, would begin to phase in a local income tax overhaul as well. House Bill 1402 in its filed form, again, stacked local income tax rates so that cities and towns would be authorized for the first time to enact their own standalone local income tax, which would stack on top of the county-wide rate that would be applied for everyone within the county. Whether you're inside the city limits, outside the city limits, everyone would pay the county rate. If you are a city resident, you would pay that city's rate. If you are a resident of a different town, you would pay that town rate. So the threshold there is that authority would only be for cities and towns over 3,500 in population. And there would be max rates for different portions of the budget. For the county rate, there would be up to 1.2 for county general purpose revenue, up to 0.4 for fire protection and EMS services, up to a 0.2 for non-municipal civil taxing units, general purpose revenue. So that would be townships, libraries, etc., that the county council could control that rate to provide some revenue to those types of units. But also then there would be an additional up to 1.2 rate for cities and towns that are not eligible to adopt their own municipal lit rate. So if you have towns within your county that are lower than 3,500 population, it would be a county option to provide more lit revenue to those units. again, up to a max rate of 1.2. So the max lit rate for counties would be combined 2.9. The max lit for any individual city or town would be 1.2. Notably, local income tax, property tax relief rates, and levy freeze rates would be rescinded. So again, that's kind of in counties that have property tax relief through lit. There would be property tax relief through other mechanisms as outlined on the last slide. And also removes a provision for collecting local income tax from out-of-state employees, which certainly need to understand more. I'm going to pause just for a second to note that if you have questions on any of this, please type those questions into the chat box on the team screen. Camden is going to be monitoring those, and Camden, feel free to jump in when you see questions. And I'll try to address some of those, but we'll also try to leave some time at the end for questions that you may have. So the property tax issue is probably, I'll say probably, definitely taking up the lion's share of our time this session. It's incredibly complex, multiple different competing ideas or plans. The governor has his plan, the Senate has their plan, the House will have a different plan, and then you have other competing plans like the J.D. Prescott plan that would completely eliminate property taxes in Indiana. That bill did not receive a hearing, by the way. So property taxes, as is the case in most sessions, is definitely taking up the most of our time. Some of the other bills that deal with tax and revenue that have passed include House Bill 1245, which allows a county option $1 gate fee at DNR park and recreation areas to help fund public safety services. And that money would be a county option, and the revenue would go to the county to spend at its discretion for public safety services. Senate Bill 104 requires a residential tax increment finance area to transfer 5% of allocated tax proceeds to the adopting unit for public safety services. So again, through the function of the TIF, they're claiming the revenue from the AV growth that should be spread to all units for services. And when there's residential development, that's an especially service intensive type of development. But again, that's taking some of those allocated proceeds and sending them back to the adopting unit for public safety services. Senate Bill 443, which was the Senate version of business personal property tax reform, was also dramatically scaled back. The introduced version of this bill would have eliminated the 30% floor using tax credits, and also increased the small filer exemption from $80,000 to $250,000. But as you see here, was dramatically scaled back so that it is only, in the Senate passed version, only increases the small filer exemption from $80,000 currently to $100,000, and that has a statewide revenue impact of about $3 million. One of the other real complex pieces of legislation for this year is House Bill 1461 dealing with road funding. And I think I mentioned early on that this would be a moving target throughout session, and it has certainly been that. The initially filed version of the bill looked a lot different than when it came out of House Roads Committee, which looked different from when it came out of the Ways and Means Committee, and looked different from when it finished second reading and ultimately passed the House. So I will now cover the current version of the bill, and again, looks functionally quite a bit different from the earlier versions. So rather than the earlier version, which would have capped community crossings at $150 million, the current version caps it at $200 million, shifts the overage to the railroad crossing safety fund called TRAX, and then in years after the first year, there would be a special matching fund just for Marion County. And that fund would be a $50 million, and Marion County would have to fully match all of those dollars. So it would be a 1-to-1 match program just for Marion County. And then any amount not used from that fund or any other money in the Community Crossings Grant Fund above that $250 million would be distributed to all local units based on lane mileage. An earlier version of this bill had a significant portion of the overage going to NDOT, but this version removes that and distributes all that fund to local units based on the new formula that it creates. It also splits the Community Crossings Fund into two different pots, half of which would be for counties with over 100,000 population and cities. So that'd be like pot one. And those units would have to have a wheel tax to be eligible for that pot of money. Pot two, if you will, with another $100 million would be for other units. So counties under 100,000 population or towns, and that fund would have a wheel tax eligibility mechanism tied to it that if you had the wheel tax, you would be eligible for the maximum grant as outlined by NDOT. So today that's $1.5 million per unit. If you do not have a wheel tax, then you would only be eligible for 50% of the cap. So in today's version, that would be $750,000. So there's certainly a sweetener there if you have adopted the wheel tax to be eligible for more money out of community crossings. Also, it would lower the 50% MVH restriction to 40% if your unit has achieved a average of 6 on the Pacer rating scale. That was moved down from 7. 7 is really high, fairly hard to achieve a 7, but 6 is still pretty good pavement rating. Also allocates the bridge responsibility, again, for bridges 20 feet and over, regardless of whether a county has a cumulative bridge fund. Moving on to the Department of Local Government Finance bill. It moves the filing of a petition for review of land value to the auditor, clarifies how PITA-BOA terms would be staggered, limits objections on public utility assessment valuation to a 15-day time period, and requires online filing of personal property returns, the DLGF's pop-in portal that would accompany a $5 fee. So again, there wouldn't be paper filing for business personal property returns. Been hearing from some of the assessors about in their communities or in their counties, they have 90% plus of filers that still file on paper as of today. So that would be a big change for those filers. Also, this legislation provides a blanket property tax exemption for any community care retirement center that is created as a nonprofit, regardless of what the entry price or of the unit is, or whether or not there is any charitable use happening at the facility. So we are certainly still in discussions with legislators about that portion as well. Also, this bill was amended in committee to require upload of all local government contracts onto Gateway. So today, the requirement is if there is a value to a contract that is over $50,000, then that's the trigger to require upload onto the Gateway portal. But this legislation would require all your contracts to go onto Gateway. So, if you're have a contract for $50 to buy pencils, it would have to go onto Gateway, and that sort of feels like overkill to a lot of our members that I have talked with. So we will be giving that portion a lot of scrutiny as it moves over to the Senate as well. Also of a lot of interest has been renewable energy matters. House Bill 1628 was quite controversial in the first half of session. That legislation did not pass out of committee. Senate Bill 425, which also deals with electric generation siting on a much, much narrower scale, passed out of the Senate. And that legislation would remove local planning and zoning control of siting of electric generation projects in defined energy development zones, specifically exempting wind and solar projects. So it would not be for wind and solar projects, but if, for example, there is an existing gas generation, electric generation facility, that utility would be able to build more gas generation there, or coal generation, or nuclear generation. Also, an energy development zone would exist where there is land that was formerly either surface or below surface coal mine property. There's tens of thousands of acres of former coal ground in Southwest Indiana that would apply to. But again, much, much narrower scale than House Bill 1628, which would have dealt with not only wind and solar, but also pipelines and sequestration and a lot of different types of development. The state budget also passed out of the House this last week. The state budget increases the state reimbursement for levels 6 felon housing at the county jail from the current $37.50 to, that should say $42 a day. That number right there should be $42 a day. Notably, you probably have seen news, and I think we shared some with you as well, that the State Department of Corrections sent out a message to all the county sheriffs saying that the state was out of money for reimbursement to counties for housing level 6 felons. So their felon reimbursement fund was completely depleted until the next fiscal year begins in July. So we will be working with the legislature to try to make sure we get all of that money that is owed to counties fully funded. We do obviously appreciate that in the new budget, the reimbursement rate goes up, although it is still maybe half of what the actual cost of housing felons in county jail is. The state budget also funds the Health First Indiana Public Health Plan, but at a $100 million per year over the biennium, which is down from $150 million in this year's budget allocation. So we will be trying to get that amount back up to at least where we have been in 2025. There has been some discussion in the State House whether the legislature may be interested in passing a cigarette tax increase to offset this cost, but also increase costs in Medicare. So keep an eye out for that potential. The budget also funds the Public Prosecution Fund, which is a new fund, which is established in House Bill 1006, that would provide reimbursement to counties of the compensation paid to deputy prosecuting attorneys if the county meets caseload and salary standards set by the state. So that would function pretty similarly to the Public Defender Commission, where if the county funds public defenders at a certain level, salary and caseload, they get reimbursement. This would do essentially the same thing for deputy prosecutors as well. And that is about a $59 million benefit to counties. Moving on to some county administration matters, House Bill 1134 adds to the reasons that a governing body may meet in executive session. House Bill 1208 requires State Board of Accounts training for sheriffs regarding oversight of the commissary fund. That bill was amended to require that the sheriff report to the county fiscal body quarterly on expenditures from the fund rather than semi-annually. House Bill 1312 would require the state to establish a public notice website by July of next year, and then allow local governments and any individual public notices that have to be made could happen on the state website. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why individuals are publishing notice. Attorneys do that all the time for individual business interests and so forth. But this would also be for local government to publish notice on the state website rather than being in newspapers. Not only from a financial standpoint do we support that, but also just the streamlining of the whole publication of notice process is really important. Especially, there are a lot of counties where there may not be a newspaper publishing anymore. A lot of places they publish weekly, and to give timely public notice on not just your regularly scheduled meetings, but all the various developments that are happening in your county, streamlining that function to allow things to happen quicker and in a more sure and timely fashion would be a benefit. So would urge you to contact your legislators in support of that bill if that sounds helpful to you, because certainly the newspapers who stand to continue to get revenue from the required publication of public notice, they're definitely working against that bill. So please talk to your legislators about that one. It would be really appreciated. House Bill 1198 would increase the $250,000 cap on in-house labor project value of $250,000 to a cap of $500,000. 1194 assigns responsibility for costs of autopsies in various circumstances, essentially whichever, I guess the situation being if a resident of one county passes away in another county and that county's coroner thinks there needs to be an autopsy, essentially whichever coroner is requesting the autopsy would be the ones to pay for it. Senate Bill 282 would allow elected office holders to take a leave of absence for a list of specific reasons, medical reasons, or maybe you're moving into active service with the military, and it allows for a replacement of that individual through the normal caucus process until that office holder who is on leave returns from their leave. Again, that would be at your option. No one could force you to take a leave of absence, but would allow for that mechanism.
And Ryan, I do see a couple questions here
Yeah.
in the chat box, if I may. One from Liz asks, is the wheel tax match requirement dollar for dollar?
Um, no. So if the question is, uh, do you have to max out your wheel tax to get the maximum amount out of community crossings? The answer is no. It's just the mechanism of that you have a wheel tax in place. Uh, it would not have to be maxed out to get the maximum amount out of the community crossings.
And then Anton has a question, more so of a comment as well. For the inmate reimbursement rate, will the appropriation be sufficient? He says it looked like the second year appropriation was going to decrease. Um, a highly a higher daily rate will not do any good if the appropriation is spent down more quickly.
That's certainly correct. Now that they run short this year, a lot of that raised eyebrows with a lot of legislators who have been working in the criminal justice space for a long time, and uh, I dare say they were taken aback by the fact that DOC had run short and not really told them about it. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that would mean that they they won't make that same mistake two budgets in a row. But I guess you never can tell. Most sections of the budget, they allow for augmentation out of the, for example, out of the uh, other funds or the uh, state surplus, for example. And in the last budget, they put out that section was not eligible for augmentation, which is questionable. But hopefully they would allow for augmentation going forward, so that if the fund ever does run short again, the state budget committee could move some funds around uh, in the meantime to cover any shortfall.
Kelly asks, is there any discussion on vaping products taxes in regards to the cigarette tax for health funding?
Uh, so there haven't been any specific proposals put forward on the cigarette tax, though in existing law there are vape taxes and um, in general a lot of discussion about concern around vaping around the state house. So I think um this is just me supposing, but I would certainly think they would include vape tax increases as well as cigarette tax increases because the same purpose. I mean, they have seen plenty of data that shows when the tax on cigarettes goes up, people stop smoking. And that is better for the state's bottom line in the long run because the state spends so much money on uh, Medicaid year over year increases, especially that they want to make sure that more Hoosiers remain healthier for longer because that helps the state bottom line into the future.
I believe that's all the questions for now
All the
in the
questions
chat.
so far. Okay.
Yep.
House Bill 1616 establishes a procedure for tax sales on mineral rights. Um Senate Bill 438 ensures that copying fees are collected in the county recorder's perpetuation fund in the manner that all the counties are doing it today. When the uh, flat fee structure went in a few years ago, the legislation wasn't exactly clear which way they were supposed to be, uh, where they were supposed to be depositing that money. The guidance from State Board of Accounts guided everyone in the right direction, but this is just to make sure that the law reflects the way that it's actually being done today. House Bill 1641 does a few different things for county government, allows an executive session to be held to discuss terms of a proposed contract, also to communicate with an attorney under privilege. It eliminates the sales disclosure form for conveyances to a governmental unit. Also prohibits a county employee, notice it says employee, from taking action on a county contract unless permitted by a county ordinance. If you think back to the last legislative session, we clarified the ability of county elected officials to take action on a contract if the county commissioners will not approve a contract. There's a certain process to be used. This is not for those situations. This is only for a county employee. So, for example, if you have always allowed your highway engineer to sign off on contracts up to $500, whatever your number is, that needs to be done in county ordinance if this legislation passes, rather than just county policy, just to make sure everyone has the clear authority to be entering into contracts, county employees, that is. Also, this bill would provide that if a body is transported by common carrier, the person in charge of the interment shall secure a burial transit permit in duplicate. Camden, I'm going to let you take over to go through some of the elections bills.
Alrighty. And before I dive in there, I see there was one more question popped up in the chat. If the county has a wheel tax, will the town then be considered to have a wheel tax since the dollars are not distributed to the city and town?
Okay, so the dollars are currently distributed to cities and towns when a county has a wheel tax. Going forward, if a if a city or town over the threshold for to be authorized to adopt their own wheel tax, I think that is also, is that 3,500 in population off the top of my head. I think that's right. Those units are authorized to adopt their own wheel tax. If after June of this year, one of those units newly adopts a wheel tax, the vehicles within that city or town would only pay the city or town wheel tax, not the county wheel tax. However, that unit would not receive a distribution of the county wheel tax. So they would not be double dipping, if you would, but those taxpayers would only pay to one unit and not the other.
All right, thanks, Ryan. And as he mentioned, I'll go ahead and jump into some of these election issues this year. As you can see, there's been a lot of election reform, I guess we could call it, with the amount of election bills out there. Starting off with House Bill 1680, which is one of Representative Wesco's larger election bills, specifically election security. And if you recall, House Bill 1264 of last year, which, required the flagging of individual using a temporary credential through BMV. And so this bill kind of takes that a step further and taking action on that by requiring the county voter registration office to send out those notices requesting proof of citizenship to those registered under a temporary credential. And also provides that an applicant, can't list their registration residency from a PO box or a commercially available mailing box. Also allows the Secretary of State's office to conduct procedure post-election audits, more designed as kind of a pilot program, and they're going to select a few counties. And I know that's something that they've mentioned. If there are any counties that'd be willing to participate, that'd be greatly appreciated. And this is a larger bill, as I mentioned, so there are plenty of other provisions in there, miscellaneous provisions like requiring the counties to submit the name and contact info of their IT providers. And it allows for poll book holders or challengers to enter and leave the polling place at any time. Previously was only limited to at least 30 minutes before the polls open. So yeah, just a bunch of miscellaneous provisions kind of in there. Um, as a bill requested from the Secretary of State's office. So moving on to House Bill 1679. Thanks, Ryan. This is another request from the Secretary of State's office, Representative Wesco's House Bill 1679, which county voter registration offices must conduct voter list maintenance every 30 days. And I know that can initially sound alarming, as the federal law requirement for the uh, voter list maintenance overhaul that's required every other year, and that's not really the case here. It's more so for minor updates, including some extra informational resources that's provided within the bill. One being like a jury duty notice that may be returned as undeliverable due to an insufficient address, amongst some other resources that it's provided in there. So mostly for minor updates like that. Um, but this bill also includes a couple of the clerk's requests this year. One being that their offices are mandated to be closed on primary and general election day, just to allow them to free up their hands on the judicial side of things to really focus on their election duties. Um, and it also provides a paid day of leave for a county employee who may request to work the polls on election day. Um, but the other clerk's request within the bill is also the presidential certification date, which I believe was September 13th this year, but kind of requested to go back to the status quo of what it used to be on September 1st, being that presidential certification date, to allow them to have more time to prepare ballots. Yeah, moving on to Senate Bill 10, one of the caucus priority bills this year, regarding voter registration. Specifically, the caucus priority piece is being that proof of identification may not be a student ID. Um, I know there are a few counties with universities located within their jurisdiction, so um, there's that. And then what may be already happening for most of you is now requiring the local health departments to share records concerning deaths. That way you can conduct voter list maintenance as necessary. Um, and then this also just puts a requirement in for voter list maintenance at least twice a year. And there's also a provision for interstate voter registration checks through the IDEA, so that if another state flags an Indiana voter as a registered in another state, the county voter registration office would be notified directly. And then Senate Bill 199, the conduct of primary elections, just allows for two or more candidates of a party to sign a written statement desiring a poll watcher for a primary election. And Senate Bill 355, the municipal elections, there's been a few of these bills floating around. One being Senate Bill 355 and a couple in the House that have been dialed back on the floor, as you may have seen. This now is specifically moving those towns with a population under 10,000 to the even numbered year elections. It excludes the town of Vernon and all cities. So that was kind of dialed back on the Senate floor last week as well. House Bill 1643, campaign finance. So this is more so a requirement for the election division to develop their own computer system to receive those campaign finance reports for local offices. No cost for counties, as mentioned. But there was an amendment also on the floor to allow the county election boards to still be able to manage those filings more closely, as I know there was a concern there with not being able to manage those filings, as well as the fees. I know that that was brought up too, that if the fees, if there were, or a fine, if there were a fine to be implemented, that money would still stay with the county as well. And then House Bill 1681, Representative Wesco's local public questions, just removing those, and as well as referendums to be placed on the ballot only during a general election. Includes election of delegates to a convention to consider ratifying an amendment to the Constitution. And then moving on. Yeah, House Bill 1633. This is one of the other bills that was an attempt to move municipal elections to even numbered years that was dialed back. It's now been created to a study committee to kind of identify those cost savings in doing so. And I believe a part of that study committee is studying the impact of vote centers if that were to be mandatory. But in regards to the municipal elections moving to even numbered years, I wouldn't be surprised if that's something they take up next year a little further. And then House Bill 1197, Election Matters, Representative Lawson, just kind of outlines a process in which a county executive can expel another member or declare that seat vacant. Requires 2/3 vote of the county fiscal as well as the county executive body. And that's specifically a process for the county executive, as I know there's been some questions related to that. Senate Bill 526, the ballot retraction bill from Senator Gaskell. This voids some advisory opinions from 2022, as well as requires those certain voting systems to now use the feature that they have to retract ballots before tabulation. And there's a requirement in there to feature public testing as well. House Bill 1052, on-site sewage systems. Really, the piece that you all should know is requires the county health departments to follow the state septic rules with a penalty attached to that with the Health First funding dollars, but also changes some technical panel makeup and rules. And then House Bill 1577. This establishes or requires the Department of Health to establish their portal for statewide food truck licenses. I know the portal for now is kind of up for speculation, but they've provided some work groups using the congressional districts to include a county health department member to be involved in these conversations as they determine fees for the license, as well as some other logistics. So yeah, that's in regards to 1577.
And then one more bill or one more slide on some development matters. House Bill 1005 would create deadlines and process for approval of building permits, plan review, and inspection. Do note that those timelines require automatic approval if the unit, be it city, town, county, doesn't process the application within the timeline. It's automatic approval. Also, that bill would require units to allow an inspection to be done by a private provider, and they would have to attest that the inspection was completed. And then House Bill 1621 would prohibit local units from being more stringent than state public works statutes. Again, taking away some local authority in public works. Also gives preference in state housing grants to units who enact pro-growth land use policies. And of course, here are contact information for your legislative team here at AIC, David, myself, and Camden. We do have some time for more questions if anyone has them to type into the chat box while you're thinking of your questions. Just go over kind of the timeline for session from here to the end. there will be about 7 weeks for the kind of the second half of session, if you will. Again, Senate is considering House bills, House considering Senate bills. They will have to trade back by mid-April. I think it's the 15th. April 15th is third reading deadline, and then they have to adjourn sine die by before April 29th. So, we got 2 more months left of session. The in the last handful of years, they've finished up a few days early, which is always appreciated by us. But again, with the state budgets left to iron out, a lot of that will be based on uh, whatever the fiscal reports are in April, as far as how much the state expects to bring in over the next biennium in terms of tax revenue. So that will be the last word on how much money they can spend in the budget. So at that time, they either add to or take away things out of the budget, and kind of goes down to the deadline. But again, it's gone fast. They've been super, super busy. There's been a lot of things for county government that have been high profile, really weighty issues. So it's been enough to keep us busy. Camden, has anyone asked any other questions?
Yeah, we got one here from Rick. Would a city resident pay both city and town wheel tax in addition to the county wheel tax?
So no, if it's adopted newly after June of this year, there are, I think, 15 cities and towns that have adopted wheel tax across the state. Currently, those residents would pay both, but the city gets a distribution back from the county for by formula for their portion. So going forward, newly adopted wheel taxes, they would only pay either the city rate or the county rate, not both of them.
And then another question here in regards to Senator Burns' paid day of leave. Do they use their own time or does the county pay the wage for the day?
So I think it probably depends on whatever your county handbook reads. I mean, if you're taking a leave of absence, you're seemingly no longer a county official, and so they would not be getting paid.
I guess
that maybe needs to be fully answered in the legislation, though.
I guess she was actually referencing the provision within one of the election bills in regards to working at a polling site, the requirement to allow a county official to request to work at a polling site for the day and mandating that they get a paid day of leave for that in order to do so. And I would say that that would be the county paying the wage for the day. And I know that in addition to the what they would make serving as a poll worker of some kind.
Yeah, seemingly they would continue to get paid by the county if the legislation requires it to be a paid day of leave. Any other questions?
Yeah. Did the bill that would eliminate township budgets disappear? I thought there was also a bill doing away with county assessor.
Yeah, so the bill on eliminating county assessors There was actually two or three bills that would have done that, but none of those have passed. Um, one of them got a committee hearing, but it was more focused on using automated data tools in the assessment process. So none of the assessors elimination bills moved. Um, and the other question was about townships. Is that right? So none of the township elimination bills progressed either. And did I just see a question about EMS service? So there is a bill that would clarify that EMS service kit can be one of the services provided by a fire district or fire territory. There's a lot of places where that's happening today, and they just wanted to make sure that that remained legal. Now, as far as newly covering ambulance services, I expect there may be portions going of 1402, which again didn't pass, but that was kind of what we believe is going to be their framework for consideration of Senate Bill 1 in the House. And in that bill, in 1402 anyway, again, we don't know whether they're going to include this in Senate Bill 1, but I suspect they might uh, allow for up to a .4 rate in lit, countywide lit, to pay for fire and EMS services. Any other questions? Man, we are punctual. Getting down to 3 minutes left. Camden, anything you wanted to bring up?
Not necessarily. As I touched on, I know there's a lot of talk on those municipal election bills. Seeing that they've kind of died down, and I know Speaker Houston has made some public comments as well in regards to election laws and mentioning that, he kind of likes them as is. And I'm not sure if that was the reasoning for some of these bills, I guess, dying or being dialed back a bit. Because I know the closed primaries bill and a straight ticket voting bill were two big policy matters that were floating around too for a while that have since been killed. So those are two issues that are also, I wouldn't foresee being taken up again during this session.
Yeah, I see also another question from Terry that what happens if the governor vetoes the property tax bill? Well, a couple of things could happen. And there's been reporting with quotes from the governor saying essentially if he doesn't think that there's enough property tax relief in whatever the property tax package is, that he would consider vetoing the bill and potentially calling legislators into special session. Keep in mind that in Indiana, constitutionally, the governor's role is not real powerful, because to override a governor's veto, you just need a simple majority of legislators voting to override a veto. So he could veto a bill and they could refuse to pass anything else, and then nothing happens. He could call them back to a special session, and again, they refuse to do anything, because the only bill that has to pass in any in any legislature, the only bill that has to pass is the state budget. All these other things are just things that are priorities of this elected official or that elected official, but the budget is the one that has to pass. So the governor has and legislators have all kind of hinted, look, they're going to continue to have conversations about these things, and I think they all want to end up in a good spot. Uh, Now, what constitutes a good spot is going to look a little different to everyone. So we'll see where they end up. Um, but yeah, that one's probably going to go to the last few days of session to iron out. They'll probably, they'll be negotiating on the budget, negotiating on property tax bill um, to the last days. So, like I said, the governor has his plan, the Senate had their plan, the House will have a plan, surely. So, a couple other questions that have popped up there. Um, is the potential lit for EMS in addition to the EMS lit in public safety? So the structure in 1402 that Chairman Thompson has outlined would do away basically with a standalone EMS lit because the functionality of EMS lit allows it off the top so it doesn't get distributed to the other units. By having a countywide rate as you would under 1402, that's not required because there is no distribution of the county rate to the other cities and towns, uh, especially the ones that have their own authority. So what is currently your EMS rate would probably fall within that 0.4 authorization as a standalone countywide lit. So there would be kind of restructuring of the the buckets, if you will, for the fiscal body, but in that restructuring, there would actually be much broader flexibility for you to adopt for whichever purpose you like.
And I know this is being recorded. Do you know if that's available on our website? Maybe a question for Elizabeth if you're still on here.
Yes, we can put it, we'll put it on the website
Okay.
and we'll send it out with next week's e-news too.
Fantastic. Well, we are 3 minutes past 2 o'clock, and I think we have answered all of the questions. As always, if you have questions that you think of later or as we go through the second half of session, please reach out to any of the three of us, and we will track down an answer for you. And thank you all for participating in our first ever AIC halftime show. Keep up to date on everything we're working on in our weekly e-news and my legislative minutes, and hopefully we're answering a lot of your questions through those portals. So have a fantastic day and look forward to representing you further in the second half of session.